Welcome to another deep dive.
All right.
This time, we're going back to the 70s.
Okay.
To Rochester, New York.
To
and alphabet murder.
alphabet murders.
Yep.
This case
Gets like
has all the elements of a
Yeah.
classic true crime mystery.
Absolutely.
3 young girls
Yeah.
murdered, a city on edge, and
a city on edge.
a string of chilling coincidences
Yeah.
that have kept investigators guessing for decades.
Yeah. It really is a puzzle
Really is.
with so many.
It's not just about finding the killer.
No, it's not.
It's also about trying to make sense of
Yeah.
a seemingly random series of events.
Trying to figure out why.
3 girls,
Yeah.
Carmen Cologne,
Wanda Walkovich.
Wanda Walkovich,
Michelle Masenza.
Michelle Masenza,
All with double initials.
all with double initials.
Yes.
All found murdered in towns starting
All found murdered in towns. The same letter as their name.
that begin with the same letter as their name.
You know, when I first heard about this case,
Yeah.
that double initial detail
Yeah.
is what really grabbed me.
It's pretty amazing.
What are the odds of that happening purely by chance? It's
Well,
almost like a
I've-
calling card,
That's haunted this case from the very beginning.
a message from the killer.
Right. Do the initials point to a specific motive or a twisted pattern, or is it just a horrifying coincidence? You know?
Let's
Nobody knows.
start with the victims.
Okay.
Carmen Cologne was only 10 years old
10 years old.
when she disappeared in November 1971.
November of 71.
Our sources describe her last known moments
Mm-hmm.
running along a busy highway,
Running along a highway.
witnesses recalling a struggle
Yeah.
with a man trying to force her into a car.
Yeah, there were witnesses who said that they saw her struggling with this man.
2 days later, her body was found.
Yeah.
And tragically, there were signs of a violent assault.
And tragically, she was assaulted.
A detail that stood out
Yeah.
in Carmen's case,
Okay.
unlike the others,
Uh-huh.
was the presence of scratch marks on her body,
Scratch mark.
suggesting a desperate struggle for survival.
Wow.
Then in April 1973,
Okay.
11-year-old Wanda Walkovich
Wanda Walkovich.
vanished
Right.
while walking home from a grocery store.
Just walking home from a grocery store.
It was broad daylight.
Yeah.
You'd think somebody would have seen something.
You'd think so.
Right.
Yeah, you would think so. Yeah.
But there were no witnesses to her abduction.
But there weren't.
Her body was found the next day,
Sadly.
miles away,
Miles away.
and it had been redressed.
And redressed.
The redressing is interesting.
Yeah.
It could be a sign
It's really bizarre.
that the killer wanted to regain
Yeah.
some control over the situation,
Like a control thing.
or maybe even a bizarre attempt to show remorse.
Remorse. Yeah, like,
It adds another layer of complexity
yeah, they felt bad about it.
to an already baffling case.
It's really a strange detail.
And just a few months later,
Okay.
10-year-old Michelle Maenza disappeared.
Michelle Manza.
She was last seen walking home from school
Walking home from school.
on November 26, 1973.
73.
Now, this is where we get a few more pieces of the puzzle,
Okay.
thanks to eyewitness accounts.
This is where we get some more information.
Michelle's case
Yeah, Michelle's case is really
is perhaps the most heartbreaking
heartbreaking
because we have those glimpses into her final moments.
because we do have these glimpses.
One of her friends
Yeah, one of her friends
witnessed a terrifying scene.
witnessed this.
A light-colored car pulling up.
A light-colored car pulls up.
A man forcing Michelle inside while she screamed for help.
And this man forces Michelle inside.
And a few hours later, another witness encountered a man and a young girl,
Another witness sees
matching Michelle's description in a car
a man and a young girl matching Michelle's description in a car.
that matched the earlier account.
That matches the earlier account.
This witness even gave a detailed description,
And this witness gives a description
which police used to create a composite sketch
to the police.
on the suspect.
And they create a composite sketch.
And here's where we see a possible link back to Carmen.
Okay.
The witness described the man
Yeah.
as having long, dirty fingernails.
Long, dirty fingernails.
Could this be connected to those scratch marks
Oh, wow.
found on Carmen's body?
That is an interesting connection.
That detail sent chills down my spine when I read it.
I can see why.
The police were able to track down the car's owner
Okay.
using the license plate number.
They were able to track him down
The witness provided
through the license plate number.
he was in his 20s,
Okay.
unemployed, and divorced.
Divorced in his 20s.
He had a criminal record,
Okay.
but nothing related to sex crimes.
But nothing related to sex crimes.
Interesting.
He claimed he was home making calls at the time of Michelle's disappearance. At the time of Michelle's disappearance, he was home making calls.
And phone records seemed to back up his alibi.
Right, and phone records backed that up.
He also passed a polygraph test, which led to his release.
And he passed a polygraph.
But that doesn't necessarily mean he's innocent, right?
So that doesn't mean he's innocent.
What if someone else made those calls for him?
What if somebody else...
What if those phone records were part of a...
made those calls?
Carefully constructed alibi?
Right.
Absolutely.
This case is full of these what-ifs.
This case is full of what-ifs.
And uncertainty.
And uncertainties.
Right.
It highlights how challenging it can be.
How challenging it can be.
To rely solely on alibis.
To rely just on alibis.
Especially when you're dealing with a...
Especially when you're dealing with a
potentially cunning and manipulative individual.
Potentially cunning and manipulative person.
Adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
The same witness who encountered the suspect with Michelle.
Okay.
Saw him again.
Saw him again.
This time near the Gannett Rochester newspapers building.
Interesting.
The man was asking about updates.
Okay.
On the Menza case.
On the Menza case, he was asking about updates.
He seemed nervous.
He seemed nervous.
Even stuttering Michelle's name.
Stuttering Michelle's name.
When the witness tried to question him further,
okay,
he ran towards a parked car.
He ran away.
Moments later, a light brown Ford Pinto sped away.
Oh, a Ford Pinto.
It's impossible to know for sure
if
the man got into the car.
Right.
But the circumstances certainly suggest that he did.
But you gotta think that he did.
That detail about the Pinto is interesting because it brings us to Dennis Termini.
Okay.
One of the key suspects in this case.
Dennis Termini.
Termini was a 25-year-old firefighter.
A firefighter?
Who died by suicide in 1974.
Died by suicide?
At the time.
While being pursued by police.
Police were pursuing him.
Yeah.
For a string of assaults on teenage girls and adult women.
Teenage girls and adult women.
On the surface, his victims didn't seem to align with the alphabet murders.
They didn't seem to align.
He was targeting older girls and women.
Right.
Not young children.
Older girls and women, not young children.
But after his death,
some
compelling clues emerged.
But some clues emerged.
That couldn't be ignored.
After his death.
So we've got this potential suspect, Termini, with a possible motive.
Right.
And we've got this Ford Pinto that keeps popping up in witness accounts.
Right.
Where do the pieces fit?
Well, for starters, Termini owned a light brown Ford Pinto, just like the one described by witnesses. And as a firefighter, he would have had a uniform, which could explain how he might have gained the trust of these young girls.
Someone in a position of authority.
Right.
That's definitely a chilling thought.
Yeah, it is.
But was there any hard evidence?
Is there any hard evidence
linking him to the crime?
Linking him to the crime.
Yeah.
There were some interesting forensic details.
Okay.
White cat hairs were found in Termini's car, and similar hairs were found with Michelle Menenza's body.
Oh, wow.
Not only that, but human hair consistent with Michelle's was also discovered in his car.
It sounds like we're getting closer to a possible connection here.
Yeah.
But I understand there was also some forensic testing.
There was also some forensic testing.
That seemed to rule him out.
That cast some doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, a test called a P30 test was done.
Okay.
And it suggested that Termini's bodily fluids didn't match the samples from the crime scenes. However, you have to keep in mind that DNA science was in its early stages back then.
Oh, right.
T30 testing isn't as precise as modern DNA analysis.
Not as precise.
No.
So it's possible he wasn't completely ruled out.
Right. It's possible that he...
maybe not definitively linked.
Wasn't completely ruled out.
Based on the technology available at the time. Yeah.
Based on the technology at the time.
Okay. Let's go back to that double initial mystery for a moment.
Yeah, the double initial mystery.
Is it just me?
Yeah.
Or does that seem like too big of a coincidence to ignore?
It seems like too big of a coincidence to ignore.
Yeah.
You're in good company.
Yeah.
That's the million-dollar question everyone keeps coming back to.
Everyone keeps coming back to.
One online forum dedicated to the case had users calculating the odds.
Wow.
One user, Milkiadas, put it at a mind-boggling 0.03%.
0.03%.
That's 3 victims with double initials found in towns that also match.
That's practically impossible.
Exactly. It's incredibly improbable.
Yeah.
The official stance is that the initials are purely coincidental.
Right.
But it's hard to shake the feeling that there might be something more to it.
Right. And speaking of connections, this forum discussion brought up another thought-provoking idea. Milquiades suggested that there might be more victims out there who don't fit the double initial pattern.
Right, they don't fit the pattern.
If there are undiscovered victims.
Yeah, if there are undiscovered victims.
That could change our understanding of the killer's motive.
The killer's motives.
And the scope of the investigation.
And the scope of the investigation.
So if we're entertaining the possibility of a broader pattern,
right,
maybe we need to consider other unsolved cases from that era.
From that era.
What about the Oakland County child killer case?
The Oakland County child killer case.
There were some similarities.
Yes, the Oakland County case, which took place in Michigan a few years later, involved the murders of 4 children.
Right.
Like the alphabet murders. Yeah. The victims' bodies were redressed. Yeah. But there were some key differences, too. Okay. The Oakland County killer meticulously washed and pressed the victims' clothing.
Really?
Plus, the geographical distance between Michigan and New York makes a direct connection less likely.
Yeah, that's a long way.
Yeah.
There were also those unsolved murders.
Right.
Of young girls in Connecticut.
Unsolved murders of young girls in Connecticut.
That happened around the same time.
Yeah.
Right?
Around the same time.
The timing is certainly interesting.
Yeah, the timing is interesting.
They stopped just as the Rochester cases began.
They did.
And then resumed after the Rochester murders ended. Wow.
The timing is definitely intriguing.
Yeah.
But without more concrete evidence,
right,
it's hard to definitively link those cases to the alphabet murders.
Yeah.
The methods used in Connecticut were different.
Okay.
And the geographical distance is a major factor.
Right.
Still, it does make you wonder if a killer who is traveling or moving around could be responsible.
It really does.
Yeah.
Now, but before we move on,
I
want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Investigative genetic genealogy.
Investigative genetic genealogy.
Or
IgG.
Or IgG.
I have to admit, I'm not entirely familiar with that.
Okay.
Can you explain how it works and how it could be used in a case like this?
Investigative genetic genealogy is essentially a way to use DNA databases.
Okay.
Like the ones used for ancestry research to identify potential relatives of an unknown person.
Okay.
Like a suspect in a cold case.
Interesting.
You start with a DNA sample from the crime scene.
Okay.
And then you compare it to the DNA profiles in these databases.
Right.
If you find a match, even a distant one, it can help you build a family tree.
Oh, wow.
And narrow down the pool of potential suspects.
So it's like a high-tech version of traditional genealogy research.
It's a high-tech
using DNA to connect the dots and find people who might be related to the killer.
Of traditional genealogy research.
Exactly.
Using DNA to connect the dots.
That's amazing.
It's been incredibly successful in cracking cold cases.
That were once thought unsolvable.
It seems like that could be a game changer.
It is a game changer.
For cases like the alphabet murders.
Yeah.
Where you have DNA evidence.
Right.
But haven't been able to find a match using traditional methods.
But you haven't been able to find a match.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful tool.
It's a powerful tool.
But there are also some challenges.
Okay. What are the challenges?
It requires access to DNA databases and the resources to conduct these complex analyses.
I see.
Yeah.
Speaking of resources, you mentioned earlier an organization called Season of Justice.
Season of Justice.
They help fund DNA testing in cold cases, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
They provide grants to law enforcement agencies who might not have the funding for advanced DNA testing.
Excellent.
They've been instrumental in helping solve a number of cold cases.
That's great.
Bringing closure to families who have been waiting for answers for years.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
It's heartwarming to know.
It is.
There are organizations out there dedicated to giving these cold cases a fighting chance.
Dedicated to giving these cold cases a fighting chance.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other suspects considered in the alphabet murders.
Other suspects?
One name that keeps popping up is Kenneth Bianke.
Kenneth Bianke.
Better known as the Hillside Strangler.
The Hillside Strangler.
What's the connection there?
Well, Bianke was actually living in Rochester in the early 1970s.
Okay.
Right around the time the alphabet murders were taking place.
Right.
And get this, he was working as an ice cream vendor.
Hold on. An ice cream vendor.
An ice cream vendor.
Now that sends chills down my spine.
Yeah.
It fits with the idea of someone who might have had easy access to children.
It fits the profile. Right. That's exactly why he caught the attention of investigators.
Yeah.
He was initially dismissed as a suspect, but he came back on their radar when that P30 test seemingly ruled out Dennis Termini.
So with Termini seemingly out of the picture, they took a closer look at Bianke.
They took a closer look at Bianke.
Was there any evidence linking him?
Was there any evidence linking him
to the alphabet murder?
To the alphabet murders.
Yeah.
They ordered Bianke to provide wrist prints for comparison to a partial print found on Michelle Moenza's neck.
Oh, wow.
The fingerprint expert couldn't conclusively match Bianke's prints.
Right.
But he didn't rule out the possibility either.
So another one of those frustrating maybes.
Another one of those frustrating maybes.
But if there was even a slight chance it could be him, why was he ultimately ruled out?
That's the frustrating part. Yeah. The reasons why Bianke was ultimately cleared are unclear.
Wow.
It's another one of those loose ends that keeps the speculation swirling.
Speaking of unclear motives, let's talk about Miguel, Carmen Colon's uncle.
Carmen Colon's uncle.
Wasn't he a suspect early on?
He was. Miguel was questioned.
Right.
But his alibi seemed solid at the time.
Right.
However, years later, he committed a horrifying act of violence.
Oh, wow.
Shooting Carmen's mother and brother before turning the gun on himself.
Wow. That certainly casts a new light on things.
Yeah, it does.
Knowing what he did later.
Right.
You have to wonder if he was involved in Carmen's death all those years ago.
You do. It's a disturbing thought.
It's a very disturbing thought.
And there's another crucial detail that was never confirmed.
Oh, really? What's that?
Whether Miguel was a secretor or a non-secretor.
Okay, I'm going to need a little help with that one.
Okay.
What does it mean to be a secretor or a non-secretor?
A secretor is someone whose blood type antigens are also present in other bodily fluids. Like saliva or semen.
Interesting.
This was an important factor in forensic investigations back then because it meant you could potentially determine a suspect's blood type from other evidence found at the crime scene.
I see.
Yeah.
So Miguel was a secretor.
Right.
And they had a sample of his saliva or something similar.
Right. If they had a sample of his saliva.
They might have been able to compare it to evidence found at Carmen's crime scene.
They could have compared it.
So the fact that no one ever confirmed whether Miguel was a secretor leaves a big question mark hanging over his potential involvement in Carmen's death.
It does.
It's incredible to think that such a crucial detail could be overlooked.
Yeah.
It really shows how much forensic science has advanced since the 1970s.
It really does. It shows how far we've come.
Yeah.
It's a testament to how much we've learned.
Yeah.
But it's also a frustrating reminder of the limitations investigators faced back then.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up,
I
want to talk about one more suspect.
One more suspect.
Joseph Nozzo.
Joseph Nozzo.
He was arrested much later. In 2011. For a string of murders in California.
For murders in California.
But there's a connection to Rochester.
But there's a connection to Rochester.
Yes.
Nozzo lived in Rochester in the early 1970s, the same time frame as the alphabet murders.
Oh, wow.
And here's another strange coincidence. One of his victims was also named Carmen Colon.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Another Carmen Colon?
Another Carmen Colon.
That's just too bizarre.
It's bizarre. Yeah. And while his DNA was compared to Wanda Wakovich's, kind of ruled out as a match, it raises the question, what are the odds of two seemingly unrelated serial killers?
What do you think?
Having victims with the same unusual name.
Okay, my head is spinning with all these coincidences and near misses.
Yeah, a lot of coincidences.
It feels like we're so close to cracking this case.
So close.
But something is always just out of reach.
Just out of reach.
So where does that leave us?
Yeah, where does that leave us?
Are there any new leads?
Are there any new leads?
Any hope for solving the alphabet murders after all these years?
Well, the good news is that we do have DNA evidence. In Wanda Wakovich's case. And a DNA profile has been created. Both Bianke and Termini have been ruled out as contributors.
That's something at least.
Yeah, that's something.
But what happens next?
Yeah, what happens next?
And that DNA be used to finally identify the killer.
That's the question everyone is asking.
Right.
Has that DNA profile been entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database? If it has, it could potentially lead to a match.
Oh, wow.
And if it hasn't, that's the first step.
It's a waiting game.
Right, a waiting game.
Hoping for a hit in the system.
Hoping for a hit.
But what if there's no match?
But what if there's no match?
Is there anything else that could be done?
There's still the option of using investigative genetic genealogy.
Right.
If they could get access to those ancestry databases and find even a distant relative, that could be a huge breakthrough.
It sounds like there's still hope.
It does.
Maybe someday soon.
Yeah.
We'll finally have answers.
We'll have answers.
It feels like we've covered so much ground.
We have.
Yet there are still so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, there are.
A lot of unanswered questions.
What stands out to you as the biggest mystery in this case?
It's hard to choose just one.
Yeah.
But the double initial coincidence continues to fascinate me.
Right.
It's statistically improbable
to
the point of being almost unbelievable.
It's really unbelievable.
But even if it is just a coincidence,
right.
It has undoubtedly shaped how we perceive and investigate this case.
It makes you wonder if the killer did choose these victims intentionally.
Right.
What message were they trying to send?
Right. What message were they sending?
Were they trying to taunt the police?
Were they trying to taunt the police?
He tried a sort of macabre game.
Create some kind of game.
No, those are questions.
Those are questions that have haunted investigators for decades.
For decades.
It's
it's impossible to know for sure.
It's impossible to know for sure.
What was going through the killer's mind?
What was going through the killer's mind?
Right.
But exploring those possibilities
Yeah.
can help us understand the psychology of the crime and potentially uncover new leads.
What about the various suspects?
The various suspects.
We've talked about Termini, Bianke, Miguel, and even Not So.
And Not So.
Do you have any personal theories about who might be responsible?
I try to approach these cases with an open mind.
Right.
Avoiding jumping to conclusions.
Sure.
Each suspect has strength and weaknesses to their case.
Yeah.
Termini had that chilling connection to the Pinto.
Right.
And the forensic evidence found in his car.
But
the P30 test muddies the waters.
Right.
Bianke's presence in Rochester and his history of violence are certainly concerning.
But there's no concrete evidence linking him to these specific crimes.
Right.
And Miguel's later actions raise serious questions about his potential involvement in Carmen's death.
Right.
But we can't ignore the fact that his alibi checked out initially.
It's like each piece of the puzzle seems to fit in a way.
Yeah, like a puzzle.
But the full picture remains elusive.
But the full picture.
And then you have those lingering questions about potential connections to other unsolved cases.
Like
the ones in Connecticut.
The possibility of a transient killer or a broader pattern that we haven't fully recognized adds another layer of complexity.
Right.
It's like looking through a kaleidoscope. Every time you turn it, you see a slightly different pattern.
Yeah.
But it's never quite clear enough to make out the complete image.
It's frustrating.
It's frustrating.
But I have to admit, it's also part of what makes true crime so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The not knowing, the uncertainty.
Yeah, the not knowing.
It keeps you thinking and searching for answers long after you finish listening.
It keeps you coming back for more.
I think it taps into our innate human desire to make sense of the world around us.
It does.
Yeah.
We want to figure things out.
When faced with a senseless tragedy.
Yeah, when faced with a senseless tragedy.
Like the alphabet murders.
Like this.
We try to find explanations.
Yeah, we try to find explanations.
Anything that can help us understand why it happened.
Anything that can help us understand.
It also reminds us that even in a world where technology is constantly advancing, some mysteries might never be fully solved.
Right. Some mysteries might never be solved.
We may never know for certain.
We may never know
who committed these crimes.
Who did it.
Or why.
Or why they did it.
But that doesn't mean we should stop searching for answers.
But that doesn't mean we should stop searching. The advancements in DNA technology offer a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, they do.
Investigative genetic genealogy has proven to be a game changer in recent years.
Right.
And it's possible that it could hold the key to finally unlocking the secrets of the alphabet murders.
And thanks to organizations like Season of Justice, more cold cases are getting a second look.
More cold cases are getting a second look.
Giving families who have been waiting for decades.
Giving families some kind of closure.
Their work is truly inspiring.
It is inspiring.
It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy,
there
are people who are dedicated to seeking justice, no matter how long it takes.
No matter how long it takes.
So what can our listeners do if they want to learn more?
What can our listeners do
about this case?
Yeah. Or even contribute to the effort to find answers.
There are some fantastic resources available online, including the Web Sleuths forum we mentioned earlier.
It's a great place to dive deeper into the details of the case, explore different theories, and connect with others who are equally fascinated by this mystery.
And if any of our listeners have any personal connections.
To
Rochester, New York. Any memories from that time period. That might seem even remotely relevant.
Yeah.
No matter how small or insignificant it might seem.
No matter how small.
We encourage you to reach out to the authorities or organizations like Season of Justice.
Please reach out.
You never know that one tiny detail could be the missing piece of the puzzle.
It could be the missing piece.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play.
It is.
In seeking justice and giving voice to the victims.
Seeking justice and giving voice.
Even if the alphabet murders are never officially solved.
Even if it's never solved.
By keeping the conversation alive.
Yeah.
By sharing these stories.
Sharing the stories.
And by supporting organizations dedicated to solving cold cases.
Supporting organizations.
We honor the memory of Carmen, Wanda, and Michelle.
We honor their memories.
And we ensure that their stories are never forgotten. I think that's a great note to end on.
It is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the alphabet murders.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a case that will stay with me for a long time.
I understand.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for listening.
Remember, sometimes the most intriguing puzzles are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
Absolutely.
But the search for truth is always worthwhile.
It is.
Until next time. Keep those minds curious.
And those hearts compassionate.